What's going on, Headliner Nation? If you felt like week one was underwhelming for your running backs, I promise you, you're not the only one that feels like that. Only 4 running backs crossed 80 rushing yards last week, and things are going to get way better. Ever since the NFL went to 3 preseason games, week 1 kind of feels more like preseason week 4 than anything. Don't panic. Stay the course. Everything is going to be just fine. And hopefully week 2 gets kicked off with a whole lot of excitement, with Washington playing at Green Bay on the road for Thursday Night Football. Jacory Krosky-Merritt was one of those running backs that crossed 80 rushing yards last week, but Washington really tried to play some games earlier in the week when they released their depth chart with JCM at number 3. Chris Rodriguez ended up being a healthy scratch. Austin Ekeler still outsnapped JCM though, 33-22, even though JCM had the better day stat-wise. Green Bay shut down the Detroit running game last week, which is something we have not seen in quite some time. So for Washington, I do want to pump the brakes just a little bit on what they could do on the ground. So JCM will be a fringe start player for me just because I'm a little bit worried about whether or not that upside will be there this week. Austin Ekeler will be a fringe start for me though because of his potential upside. Last week, the Detroit running backs had 14 targets in the passing game and caught all 14 of them. Again, not a ton of yards to go with them, but if Austin Ekeler could see 7 targets this week, maybe 8 targets, he can end up having a really great fantasy day for fantasy owners. Washington also shut down the New York Giants run game last week. But this is a completely different offense that they're going to be facing. One that's going to throw the ball way better than what the New York Giants can. So Josh Jacobs has a great opportunity to get back in the saddle this week. He's still going to be a guy that's a safe start for me. Yeah, Detroit had their way with the run game, but nobody's going to keep Josh Jacobs down for that long. I'm going to admit right now that one of the biggest L's that I've taken in a while is completely misreading the Jacksonville backfield heading into 2025. Jacksonville going up against Cincinnati this week. We don't have to worry about Tank Bigsby anymore because he was just traded to the Philadelphia Eagles. The coach speak was all over the place for Jacksonville. At first, there was rumors that Travis Etienne was going to be traded. And then when talking about Travis Etienne, the coaching staff felt like they thought they could get him worked into the game plan. They felt like they were excited about Tank Bigsby as well. Later in the preseason, there were some thoughts that maybe Tank Bigsby would be traded, and then he was completely irrelevant. Travis Etienne played 40 snaps this past week. Tuitt and Tank combined played 18. So it was clear that Travis Etienne was the guy. And after the trade, it really feels like Bhayshul Tuitt is going to be on the way up as well. As long as Etienne continues to perform, he will end up being just fine. And going up against a Cincinnati defense that gave up quite a few passing yards to running backs last week, Travis Etienne could get his work in the passing game this week, even if hitting another 100 yards on the ground really isn't in the question. Chase Brown is one of the many running backs in this video that I'm going to use the word to describe underwhelming. But again, there's several of them from last week. There's no concerns over Chase Brown. He scored a touchdown, which helps salvage his fantasy day for you all. And going up against Jacksonville, it's just going to take maybe a couple of games for Cincinnati to get rolling. They're a historically slow starting team. For Chase Brown, the biggest thing for him, he was the only running back on the roster to get a carry last week. Tyrone Tracy did not have a great week in week 1. And going up against Dallas this week, I don't know if it's going to get any better. Now, here are the positives for Tyrone Tracy. He played 74% of the snaps. Devin Singletary played 10. Cam Skattebo, he played 8. Tracy was clearly the lead back, and it wasn't even close. And Devin Singletary was the number 2, so you didn't even need to worry about Skattebo really starting to take things away from him. Dallas's defense did a really good job of limiting Saquon Barkley last week. They held him to 3.3 yards per carry. So do I trust Tyrone Tracy this week? No, not going up against Dallas that just limited one of the best running backs in all of football to a pretty mediocre game by his standards. I really feel like people are going to hate this fringe start designation for Javonte Williams after scoring a couple of touchdowns last week. But I really think that people fail to realize that Jalen Carter spitting on Dak Prescott and getting himself ejected was huge for Javonte Williams to even get close to those 2 touchdowns. On a positive note, he played 78% of the snaps. He's clearly the RB1 there in town, and he's the only Dallas running back that you should be interested in starting. But he still only averaged 3.6 yards per carry, even when he didn't have Jalen Carter in the middle of that defense. So realistically, for Javonte Williams, for him to be inside the top 20, he has to score a touchdown. If he can, great. He's going to be kind of in that RB2 area, more than likely. But he's going to need to start putting up some yards to go with it. It's really hard for me to start DeAndre Swift when the Detroit Lions defense, for as bad as that team looked as a whole, kept Josh Jacobs in check last week. DeAndre Swift, he was not good either. Yeah, he got 17 carries, but he averaged 3.1 yards per attempt. The same old inefficient DeAndre Swift. And maybe it will take some time getting used to this Ben Johnson offense for him to really let loose. If you drafted DeAndre Swift, more than likely you have to start him, but he's a fringe start for me. He's a guy that maybe finds himself on the top 24, barely looking in, but his upside is going to be very limited against this Lions defense. People are going to be freaking out over the Detroit Lions offense, and I think some of it is warranted. And I think some of it doesn't make any sense because if you've listened to this channel this offseason, yeah, I told everybody not to worry about the Detroit Lions offense, but I also told you to expect a slow start. That's what happens when you don't play any of your starters in the preseason and you're replacing 3 guys right in the middle of the offensive line. Plus, you've got a new offensive coordinator. It's going to take time. If anybody thought the Detroit Lions were going to come out and put 30 plus up on the Green Bay Packers on the road after they added Micah Parsons to that defense, you were kidding yourself. I knew that was going to be a tough game, and I warned everybody that this could end up happening. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs, he really got us through last week in the passing game. He caught all 10 of his targets, and going up against the Chicago Bears, he could end up being targeted just as much this week. Hopefully we can get the run game going once again, but it could be 2 or 3 weeks for Detroit starts to look like themselves over the past couple of years. So David Montgomery is going to be more of a fringe start. He's going to be very touchdown dependent. If Detroit can get in the red zone, expect David Monty to score. If they don't get in the red zone, he's probably not going to have quite big enough numbers to really make you feel good about him being in your lineup unless he's just a flex play for you. Kyren Williams showcased in week 1 exactly why we all should have been drafting him. 82% of the running back snaps and a touchdown to go with it. He's got touchdown potential every single week. And Tennessee did do a decent job of holding Denver running backs in check last week. J.K. Dobbins was able to find the end zone. R.J. Harvey did have a big run. So there's some potential there for Kyren Williams. But again, 80 plus running back snaps plus a touchdown potential every single week is going to make Kyren Williams startable regardless of who they go up against. Tony Pollard's upside in week 2 is probably going to be limited once again, but we didn't draft Tony Pollard for his upside. We drafted him for his floor. And right now with Tyjae Spears banged up, he played 89% of the snaps in week 1. And yes, he had underwhelming numbers like a majority of other running backs out there, but he's going to be on the field. And he's going to be a decent flex option for those of you that are looking for points in your lineup. The LA Rams defense, for as good as they were last week, they did allow a decent amount of rushing yards to Nick Chubb. I wouldn't be expecting anything more than that for Tony Pollard this week. But maybe as Cam Ward progresses each and every week, if he can be a little bit better this week in the passing game, he can help open things up. Tony Pollard, if they can get in the red zone, has some touchdown potential. There are going to be some backfields that we will continue to monitor because of the workload split between the guys back there. And New England is absolutely going to be one of those backfields. Last week, Ramondre Stevenson, to nobody's shock, led that split 65-35. Now, I expected TreVeyon Henderson to maybe be a little bit closer because I did find it odd that Stevenson was on the field that much in a game that New England was trailing. Getting TreVeyon Henderson out there is going to be important, and it's going to start happening. But we can see his explosive playmaking ability even with fewer touches. And that's why he's a guy that will be a fringe start at the running back position, because even if he has fewer snaps than Rhamondre Stevenson, he's got more big playability, which is still going to give him a decent ceiling every single week. Now, if Rhamondre Stevenson continues to get more touches without that explosive upside, TreVeyon Henderson's floor is not going to be one that we will love, but unfortunately, it's not enough for Rhamondre Stevenson to be a start right now. Until we see a little bit more out of him, he's going to have to be a sit, while TreVeyon Henderson will be a fringe play for me. It was really hard for Miami to run the ball down 23-0 through 3 quarters to the Colts last week. So obviously, De'Von Achane not getting a ton of work is not that shocking. I thought he might not get a ton of work, but for the opposite reason last week. Part of the reason why I thought De'Von Achane might be a nuclear or landmine player was because I thought Miami might lead that game enough going into the second half and even the fourth quarter that De'Von Achane could end up getting some rest. And it ended up being the other way around. But even with De'Von Achane being banged up and being down by quite a bit, he still ended up playing way more than Ollie Gordon. But what I really don't love seeing, in a game where Miami was playing from behind, De'Von Achane only saw 4 targets. Now, maybe that's because, yes, he has been banged up and they wanted to be very careful with him this week. And maybe next week we'll get him going a little bit, going up against New England. If that happens, that is great. But Miami, if you're going to be trailing and you're only going to be giving De'Von Achane 4 targets, fantasy owners, you are not going to be happy with that type of production. Hopefully De'Von Achane is more healthy this week, and if he is, the numbers should reflect it. The complete meltdown of Christian McCaffrey owners last week when he popped up on the injury report with a calf issue was, I apologize, hilarious to watch. And you knew it was coming. If you drafted him in the first round, you knew that you were going to have to deal with that happening on a potential weekly basis. Now, he ended up being fine. And if you started him, great, which I told you all to do. In the live show, I had people asking, should I trust him? Should I trust him? And I said, I don't care if you trusted him or not. If you drafted him in the first or second round, you got to play him. You got to put him in your lineup. And this week, Brock Purdy's banged up, George Kittle's banged up, CMC definitely could eclipse or at least come very close to the 31 touches he saw this past week, which easily puts him inside the top 12. Alvin Kamara's value in 2025 hinged on his work in the passing game, and with a couple of big unknowns at the quarterback position for the New Orleans Saints this year, it was hard not to like the potential that Kamara could see 5, 6, 8, 10 targets any given week. But then week 1 rolls around and he sees 2 targets and he was borderline on the ground, which we have seen over the last few years. Alvin Kamara needs to be utilized in the passing game. He's just not the same running back on the ground. He's not going to have huge days consistently like he used to. His efficiency has dropped each of the last several seasons. It is not trending up. So his work in the passing game really helps make up for that. But this week, that's really concerning. If he's going to be getting 2 targets in the passing game all season long, Alvin Kamara is going to be a borderline flex play. He's going to have some decent games on the ground here or there, but not like he used to. And if he's not being utilized in the passing game, he's going to be very frustrating to own. We need to keep a very, very close eye on this situation. And you're going to continue to start him for right now. And I really hope the numbers aren't underwhelming, but 2 targets is going to make it trend that way. Can we discuss for a second how the Buffalo defense got cooked by Derrick Henry last week? I mean, they are well done after that. But if you're looking to cook up some tasty treats for this week of the NFL season, then you need to get our fantasy football cookbook, which you can do right now at the link down below, thefantasyheadliners.com/cookbook for only $8.99. And it has 50 plus game day recipes in it that you are not going to want to miss out if you're a foodie just like my family. And this cookbook is super unique and fun because it takes matchups from each week of the season, combines them together to give us an appetizer, a main dish, and a drink that's a taste of both of the cities that are playing each other. How about for week 2, a nice adult beverage that's going to celebrate San Francisco and New Orleans called the Bayou Gold Rush. Those who tried it called it bold, herbal, and boozy with some serious swagger. So head down to the link below, get yours. It's only $8.99, and if you're a foodie, you're definitely going to want to try out some of the awesome recipes for game day activities this season. Make sure you take some pictures and send them to us, and also make sure that you upload your recipes so you can be featured in the cookbook for next season. I've got good news, and I've got bad news. We'll start with the bad news. James Cook only played 58% of the offensive snaps last week for the Buffalo Bills. Now, I don't expect him to be a running back that plays 80+% of the snaps, but I really would love him to be a lot closer to 70%. We saw exactly what we saw from him last year. He's going to score touchdowns, but that's really what's going to make or break his fantasy days. If he doesn't score a touchdown, he's not going to have the greatest of days. But here's the good news. Ty Johnson and Ray Davis behind him, they split snaps evenly. So it's not like there's a clear-cut RB2 that's going to be infringing upon James Cook anytime soon. They're just giving him some rest. And maybe week one, that was the game plan. Maybe week one, they just didn't want to put him out there that much because, you know, he spent a little bit of time waiting on that new deal and maybe wasn't participating the way that he should have been. And now it's going to take some time to ramp up. And if that happens, that's okay. I would just like him to get onto the field a little bit more often than what we saw in week one. Breece Hall only played 58% of the snaps last week, but boy, did he do everything possible to make sure you had as much upside with those 58%. Braylon Allen only played 31% of the snaps, and I think this split backfield, maybe it was overblown this season. It wouldn't have shocked me, and they sure seemed like they were headed in that direction. And given the fact that the offensive coaching staff in New York is a lot of the same people that were in Detroit last year, I was expecting to see Breece Hall probably lose a few touches, but if he shows that explosiveness, it's not going to matter. If this guy's on the field 60% of the time and he plays like he did this past week, he's going to be around the RB12 spot all of the time, which is good. That explosiveness is not something that has been lost. He's one of the better running backs in the NFL when it comes to just pure attributes. Unfortunately, we just didn't know what we were going to be getting into with a split backfield. So Breece Hall is going to continue to be a start going up against Buffalo this week that just got ran over by Derrick Henry. I don't think he's going to have that type of day, but he could take advantage of a poor run defense once again. Another backfield that we're going to be keeping a very close eye on, and Kenneth Walker was a guy that I wanted to draft everywhere that I could this year, but I made it known if you're drafting Kenneth Walker, you've got to get Zach Charbonnet with him. So depending on how this backfield works out, you probably got yourself covered no matter what, so don't freak out. Both of these guys are going to be labeled as a fringe start right now. Zach Charbonnet did end up playing 58% of the snaps last week, while Kenneth Walker only played 40% of the snaps. But again, over the last 2 to 3 weeks, Kenneth Walker has been dealing with a little bit of an injury. He's been banged up already, which is unfortunate, but once he gets healthy, he should end up being the lead back. But if you have Zach Charbonnet and you don't feel comfortable playing Kenneth Walker, play Zach Charbonnet. If you only have Kenneth Walker and he's a fringe start for me, go somewhere else for right now until you know that he's at 100%. This backfield is going to run way better than what we saw this past week. And now they're going to be going up against Pittsburgh that just allowed over 100 rushing yards to Breece Hall. So both of these guys could definitely be in for a decent day. But we'll keep an eye on the snap percentages. We'll see if the gap closes this week, and we'll see where it goes from here if Kenneth Walker is fully healthy. Good old Arthur Smith being good old Arthur Smith. Why in the world is Kenneth Gainwell playing more snaps than Jaylen Warren? All offseason long, people were like, Caleb Johnson, Caleb Johnson, Caleb Johnson. And then we got closer to the end of the preseason. It was like, Jaylen Warren is probably going to be the starter, which is something I told everybody, and I included him in several videos as a sleeper candidate that you may want to grab a little bit later on in your drafts. Caleb Johnson played 4 snaps this past week. 4. And Kenneth Gainwell was the lead back. I don't think anybody saw that coming. But again, Arthur Smith is going to Arthur Smith. Kenneth Gainwell is not a startable fantasy asset. We are not picking up Kenneth Gainwell. We're not playing Kenneth Gainwell. I don't care how many snaps he plays. Jaylen Warren is the better back, and it's on paper and on film, and it's not even close. So why they would give more snaps to Kenneth Gainwell is beyond me, and it's why Jaylen Warren is a fringe start instead of a locked-in-stone start for me, regardless if you played him at the flex or the RB2. He scored last week, which was good, and hopefully he keeps that up, but we got to get Kenneth Gainwell out of there. The Browns' backfield is going to be a menace to try and figure out over the next few weeks. Quinshon Judkins has signed his rookie deal, and he is expected, per reports, to potentially be out on the field and be game ready for week 2. What does that mean, though? Does he play at all? Is he going to still be suspended at some point in time? Does he play 10 snaps this week? Does he play 30 snaps? I don't know. I don't know what we're going to get from Quinshon Judkins. Did Dylan Sampson do enough last week? He wasn't great on the ground, but he was really good in the passing game. You got to expect that Jerome Ford is going to be the odd man out more than likely. He was already losing looks to Dylan Sampson last week, and he's probably going to lose looks to Quinshon Judkins as he builds up. So as of right now, I don't think we can start any of these guys. We're going to have to sit them for at least 1 week, maybe 2, before we start to figure out what this split will look more like. There's really only one piece of analysis that I need to give you for Derrick Henry. He was arguably one of the best players in all of football this past week against the Buffalo Bills, and now he's going to be running angry against a less superior defense after that fumble that ended up costing them the game. Derrick Henry could be in for another huge week. He might be a top 3 running back right now. And quick side note, has there ever been a player in fantasy football that people make more excuses not to draft every single offseason that ends up throwing it back in their face every single season? Man, y'all are spending a lot of time hating Derrick Henry when you should just be appreciating the greatness and having him on your fantasy team. Another backfield that we know a little bit more about that is still going to be tough to call here over the first few weeks of the season. RJ Harvey was more explosive than J.K. Dobbins, but J.K. Dobbins was definitely on the field more, got more touches, and even scored a rushing touchdown. So for right now, J.K. Dobbins to me is going to be a startable candidate, because if Denver gets into the red zone, they're probably going to give J.K. Dobbins the ball. But if RJ Harvey keeps on breaking some big plays like he did this past week, I would not be shocked if he starts to see more and more touches. And when that happens, we could end up shifting to him being the starter. But for now, it's J.K. Dobbins, a guy that if you're flexing, probably you're happy with because you drafted him super late. Jonathan Taylor had almost 100 total yards. He didn't look bad on the ground last week. He didn't look great, though. And I know that DJ Giddens added 12 carries. He's a great backup to have, and if you own Jonathan Taylor, you should probably have Giddens on your roster. But I think his 12 carries are more along the fact that this game was out of control against Miami last week, and they probably wanted to get him some touches and keep Jonathan Taylor healthy. This week going up against Denver, it's going to be a tough matchup. Jonathan Taylor probably has the same ceiling that we saw last week. Maybe close to 100 total yards if he gets some work in the passing game. Realistically, probably looking closer to 80 total yards. And we're going to hope that they can get close enough to score a touchdown. I really kind of laugh at the fact that people were like, oh, Anthony Richardson's the starter, so we don't have to worry about as many rushing touchdowns being taken away from Jonathan Taylor. And then Daniel Jones scores 2 rushing touchdowns in week 1. Chuba Hubbard, even with Rico Dowdle being on the team and brought in free agency, looks like every bit of a bell cow in this backfield because he was the guy this past week. He had 16 carries for 57 yards, even though they lost by 16 points, and he added 5 targets in the passing game. Find yourself an offense that will commit 16 carries to a guy on a team that is losing. That is really good workload right there. And regardless of the matchup, that type of workload is going to put you in the RB2 conversation every single week. So right now we know if Carolina is losing, they're still going to commit to getting Chuba Hubbard the ball. That's what we want from starting running backs. He's probably your RB2. Keep putting him right there. The Carolina Panthers just allowed 143 rushing yards to Travis Etienne. Last week, James Conner was not great. 39 rushing yards on 12 carries, averaging 3.3 yards per carry. Trey Benson, 8 carries for 69 yards, averaging 8.6 per carry. Now, a majority of that came on one carry when he ran for 52 yards. So I get it. If you're going to make that argument that, oh, Kyle, a majority of his production came on one play, I understand that argument. I've made that argument before. You don't like to see that on a consistent basis, but it is something that we talked about this offseason with Trey Benson. He's explosive, and he showed it last season, and he showed it again this past week. If he keeps ripping off some explosive plays, even if the rest of the touches aren't nearly as good as we would like, he's going to start taking touches away from James Conner. So as of right now, James Conner is still a guy that we're going to start because he's clearly the lead back and he will continue to be the lead back. Conner played 65% of the snaps this week compared to Trey Benson's 33. While we probably see very close to that same type of split again this week, don't be shocked if Trey Benson still finds himself with 6, 8, 10 carries and ends up breaking off a couple of them going up against this defense that allowed a ton of rushing yards last week. Trey Benson isn't startable as of yet, though. The only way you're starting him is if you're in a deep league and you don't have any other options. Even if he does have a decent game as the backup, James Conner probably still has a really good game in this matchup and doesn't lose a ton of touches. It doesn't matter who Saquon Barkley is playing, he's going to be in your lineup. You don't need me to give you a huge detailed analysis on that. He was underwhelming last week based on his standards, but he still scored a touchdown, which is great. He gets Kansas City this week in a rematch of last year's Super Bowl. He'll be in our lineup. Yeah, the Eagles gave up a couple of rushing touchdowns to Javonte Williams last week, but I don't necessarily think that happens if Jalen Carter doesn't get himself kicked out of the game. Isaiah Pacheco was really underwhelming against the Los Angeles Chargers. He only had 5 carries, and I know some of that was because the Chargers were playing very well in that game. But listen, Isaiah Pacheco is a guy that I was concerned about this offseason, and some of those concerns showed up in week 1. Going up against Philadelphia this week, I don't think things get a whole lot better, and I would be looking for somebody else to try and help me out. Yeah, Bijan Robinson looked terrible on the ground last week. So did Tyler Algier, though, and Tyler Algier still outperformed him. But guess what? He caught 6 of his 7 targets for 100 receiving yards and a touchdown. Day salvaged. Bijan Robinson is still going to be in our lineups this week going up against Minnesota. DeAndre Swift didn't have a whole lot of luck with them this past week, but Bijan Robinson is way better than DeAndre Swift. Even if his rushing stats are a little bit lower once again, he should help out in the passing game, which is just fine by me. I don't care where you get the yards or the touchdowns, just get them. This Minnesota backfield is really interesting. Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason are going to complement each other very well. And this offseason, I talked about Jordan Mason. I thought there was a role for him on this team, and I really thought that he could be fantasy viable for those that wished to draft him. But even I was a little bit shocked that he got 16 carries in a game where Minnesota was trailing into the 4th quarter. That's good news for Jordan Mason. Aaron Jones didn't look quite as crisp on the ground yesterday, but he did contribute a touchdown in the passing game and will likely continue to be a part of the passing game as well. Now, Atlanta did not offer up much to Bucky Irving this past week. He was another running back that unfortunately had a very underwhelming performance. So going up against these guys this week, Jordan Mason and Aaron Jones could be a little bit underwhelming once again as well. But they are going to be fringe start players for me. Aaron Jones, a flex option because of his potential work in the passing game. Jordan Mason, a flex option because if you're getting 16 carries while losing, you're going to get 16 carries while winning. And hopefully this week they can open up the run game a little bit more often, and maybe he can find a touchdown of his own. We've got 2 Monday Night Football games this week, one of which is going to be super late for those of you on the East Coast. Make sure you take a little bit of a nap during the day so you can catch all of the action later that night. But we're going to kick things off with Tampa Bay at Houston. And Bucky Irving was another one of those studs that salvaged an okay fantasy day with a touchdown last week. This Houston front did kind of hold Kyren Williams in check, but he got a touchdown. So Bucky Irving could end up seeing realistically a lot of what we saw last week, maybe 60 to 80 rushing yards and a touchdown to go with it. We know Tampa Bay is going to move the ball through the air, and that's good for Bucky Irving. The most positive thing that can come from week 1 is the fact that everybody tried to overblow the fact that this was going to be a committee backfield. It was never going to be a committee backfield, and we saw that in week 1. Bucky Irving played 76% of the snaps. Rachaad White, only 24. Nick Chubb has definitely worked his way into that fringe start area at the running back position. More than likely, you're only going to flex him, and more than likely, you don't need to start him right now. And in this matchup, you probably don't have to, but last week in a pretty tough matchup, he ran for 60 yards on 13 carries. I expect that role to continue to grow, especially if CJ Stroud struggles as much as he did last week too. Omarion Hampton is the guy for the Los Angeles Chargers right now. He played 80% of the snaps in week 1 last week. Najee Harris played 18% of the snaps. Now, Omarion Hampton made a pretty critical error at the end of the game, running out of bounds and stopping the clock when he should have went down inbounds. Jim Harbaugh and the coaching staff let him know that he had made a mistake. And because of that, maybe you do see him lose a few more touches to Najee Harris this week. But we're not going to go from 80 to 50% just like that. If anything, he might go 80 to 70, 80 to 65 at the worst. And even with that percentage of touches, he's still a guy that can be started. And this week going up against Las Vegas didn't allow a whole lot to the New England Patriots on the ground last week, but Omarion Hampton is way better than what we saw from those guys, and I do anticipate him having a much better game this week, especially because Las Vegas is probably going to be prepared for Justin Herbert and the three-headed monster of McConkey, Allen, and Quentin Johnston. It could end up being a tough week for Ashton Jeanty once again. The good news is he's going to get plenty of touches. And the good news is that Las Vegas moved the ball through the air so well that he was still able to score a touchdown this past week. But Ashton Jeanty, he's not getting a lot of push up front. And I do expect the offensive line to get better as the season goes. So you're going to have some patience with him. It's not his fault that he can't get a block. That's not Jeanty's fault. We're still going to start him this week. Hopefully we can still find ourselves in the red zone, and hopefully Las Vegas looks to control the game a little bit and keep Los Angeles off the field as much as possible. Headliner Nation, hopefully you appreciated us moving back to the matchup analysis for the start and sit videos. And there's going to be more detailed analysis as the season goes on, but you're only a week into the season, so you don't want to overreact to some things, and you want to make sure that you're giving data that means something. But here over the next few weeks, as things start to even out and trends start to establish themselves, we're going to have some really great things to talk about in these videos. So on the way out of here, hit the like button for me. Make sure you comment on the video with any questions you have. And as always, turn on the bell notifications and subscribe to the channel. So anytime we drop new content or go live, you'll know about it right away. Headliner Nation, I need y'all to stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.